Hey everyone, Chase Elleby with Williams Elleby coming to you today with our video number 6 in our series of 52 weeks of personal injury. And today we're going to talk about probably the number one question we get, which is, what is my case worth? Joel, what do you tell the clients when they ask, what is my case worth?
I think it depends, right? I mean, you can.
The classic lawyer answer is always depends.
It depends, or ask your lawyer. So we're lawyers and we're telling you it depends. But seriously, it really does depend on the circumstances of your injury, the circumstances of your life, the degree and length of your suffering. All of these type things play a role in what your case is worth, the availability of insurance.
Right.
So let's try to break it down a little bit into each element, I guess, and talk about why that matters. So I'd say the first thing, you can have the exact same injury for two different people. For example, let's say you've got a broken arm, all right? And your broken arm for one person who may have a desk job and use dictation software in order to type into the computer and still do their job may not have as dramatic an impact on their life as somebody who works construction who has a broken arm and can't lift anything or use power tools. Right. So lost wages may be more for the exact same injury, right? So it really does depend on the circumstances of your life and how that injury affects it.
Right. It's kind of in that same vein, speaking of same injuries, you could have a broken arm and some person could recover great. It could be a fracture that just needs a cast or a soft cast and that's it. Or it could be a fracture that needs surgery and then it becomes infected and they need a second surgery. And then, the amount of medical bills that you start to incur for what originally started off as the same injury doubles, triples, gets even greater and greater. So I think that it really does. I mean, you would think that having the same injury would mean relatively around the same value, quote unquote, for a case, but that's certainly never the case. There's no two cases that's ever alike. And that's true no matter what. So I think another thing, probably, I don't say one of the most important, but certainly one of the most important when it comes to what my case is worth, is how much insurance coverage is available, right? That's always the number one thing that we try to find out as lawyers. Once a case is, a client calls us, they get in a wreck. I want to know how much insurance is out there so I can advise my client on, what are you looking at as far as potential recovery, right? We've had wrongful death cases with only $25,000 of insurance coverage. And we've had, minor rear end collision, maybe go to the chiropractor, a handful of times, and there's millions of dollars worth of coverage. So, that's really going to kind of dictate what the value of the case is going to be from the onset, is just knowing what that coverage is, right? I always love seeing those, billboards with the, certain lawyers saying, I've got a check for, $1 million. Well, that's not always the case, right? People think just because you have these bad injuries, you're going to get a really big recovery, but you're not going to get a big recovery if there's no insurance. And the chances of you actually collecting above whatever the insurance is for a particular case is very minimal, because it's usually an individual. That individual has zero assets to cover anything above what the insurance would cover otherwise. So you're pretty much, I guess, limited by how much insurance there is.
Yeah. I mean, the truth of the matter is that in most situations, not always, but the vast majority, independently wealthy individuals do not have minimum limits.
Right, they got plenty of coverage, right?
They're the ones that have the $5 million policies. The people who are making ends meet paycheck to paycheck, like a lot of Americans are nowadays, they're the ones that are more likely going to have the minimum limits policy.
Right.
So if you run into a minimum limits policy, we'll check to see if there are any assets for the person who's at fault. But most of the time, when they have that minimum limits policy, there's just nothing else there.
Right. And quite honestly, we're not in the business of collecting money from people individually anyhow. It's, if you get a judgment against someone who doesn't have enough insurance coverage, they're just going to file for bankruptcy anyway. So, I think... Well, go ahead. I didn't mean to...
No, you're good. I was just going to say, I think another thing that you really have to consider is the permanency of the injury. Right. So if you've got an injury that you're going to suffer from the rest of your life and you're 30 years old, that's a long time to suffer, right? And so you can recover for future pain and suffering and future medical expenses, even though they haven't been incurred yet, So permanent injuries and the worse, I guess the worse the suffering is going to be over the pendency of the remainder of your life, the greater the case, the greater value that should be assigned to that case for the future damages, as opposed to a case where, if someone is injured and they have, some misalignment in their spine, they're sore for 3 months, they go to the chiropractor, maybe do some physical therapy, and then they're 100%. That's great for that person, right? But their case is not going to be worth as much as someone who's going to have to suffer the rest of their life. So the length and degree of suffering plays a huge role in what a case is worth.
Right. And I think kind of one more thing to touch on, speaking of case value, has to go with, where your case is at, like whether you're pre-suit, litigation, ready for trial, post-trial, right? A lot of the times when we file a lawsuit, right, that means we're serving the lawsuit against an individual, and then we're dealing with the insurance company. But our goal, again, as lawyers, is always to try to get the case to trial. But there's a risk that's involved with going to trial, a risk for the plaintiff, right, because a jury could award you 0 or a lot less than what you think the case is worth, but also a risk to the defendant because they could award a lot more than what the defense is willing to pay or what they should pay. So a lot of times the value of the case can increase or decrease depending on what happens in the discovery phase or getting close to trial. And it also increases or decreases, how closer you get to trial. I always tell clients, we'll send a demand to the insurance company, try to get things worked out before having to file a lawsuit. And the response I get from the insurance company is always going to be less than if we were to file the lawsuit, right? I would say always. Most of the time, it's always going to be less. So if my client
assuming there's enough
insurance coverage, exactly right. And though, so I'll tell the client, let's file suit because the offer is probably going to go up, and it usually does, right? And it starts to tick up and tick up and tick up the closer you get to trial. And that also impacts the value of the case, right? Because some people are risk averse. They don't want to mess with it. I get it. You don't want to file suit. That's perfectly fine. But it will have an impact on the value of your case. Yeah. Again, assuming there's insurance.
That's right. And speaking of filing the lawsuit, I think another huge factor is where the lawsuit's going to be filed and who's representing you in that lawsuit. So when I say where the lawsuit's going to be filed, lawyers refer to this as venue, but really what we mean is just the county where that lawsuit will be filed. And at least in Georgia, you have to file the case in the county where the defendant resides. If there's multiple defendants, more than one person at fault that you have to sue, you can pick whichever county you want between those defendants. But you do have to file it in the county where they reside. If it's a very conservative county that traditionally returns lower verdicts, your case is probably not going to have as high a settlement value. If it's a more progressive county that typically comes back with higher verdicts, you're going to have higher settlement value in your case because the insurance company or the defendant knows that the chances of them getting hit with a large jury verdict is higher in a more progressive rather than conservative county. And turning on that too, really who your lawyer is plays a role as well, because insurance companies not only keep up with the jury verdicts that come out of certain counties, they also keep up with track records of lawyers. So they know which lawyers are willing to try cases, which ones always settle cases and that kind of stuff. So you want to make sure you get a good trial law firm, preferably one that can handle your case from start to finish. Certainly at Elleby, we do that. This is a coffee cup from Piazza, Newbern, and Walker. There's some great trial attorneys in Georgia. Little plug, if you want to be mentioned in our video, send us free swag and we'll mention you. Assuming you're not a scrub, if you're a legit attorney, but we'll mention your video. But just make sure that whichever law firm you hire is competent and has a track record to back up what they're telling the insurance company.
Right. Yeah, and I think kind of going back to your venue discussion, right, because most cases hinge on that intangible, pain and suffering award, right? So everyone always asks me, well, what's pain and suffering? Well, pain and suffering is whatever the enlightened conscience of a jury decides that amount to be. And there's certainly ways.
What in the world does that mean?
Right, exactly. I mean, I'm a lawyer and I still don't even know what that means, right? So you go to trial and you ask the jury basically for money. So conservative venues are traditionally not known to give large pain and suffering awards. I mean, heck, in voir dire, we'll ask potential jurors, who here just doesn't believe in pain and suffering awards at all? And you'll get a handful of people that raise their hand. And so that kind of, I guess, highlights why venue is important. and why adjusters would like to use that venue sort of argument when they say, well, we think we're going to offer you this because you're going to have to file in this county, and that county doesn't award, a lot when it comes to pain and suffering. So yeah, certainly a factor when it comes to the value of your case.
And one last thing that we'll try to wrap it up on, I think the quality, if that's the right word, I don't even know if that's the right word, but the type of person that the plaintiff or the injured party is, and also the type of person that the defendant is, plays a huge role.
100%, yeah.
Because you can have the best lawyer in the world and be a vindictive person, and the jury's not going to like that person, right? So they're not going to empathize with them. They're likely to give them less money. If you're a very nice, professional, empathetic type person that they can relate to, they're more likely to award more money.
Yeah.
Same for the defendant. If they love the defendant, they're less likely to render a huge verdict against them. If they think the defendant's a jerk, the verdict's likely to be higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, if people like our videos, what should they do?
I should hit the like button, subscribe, and make a comment, as I always say.
Yeah, comment. All the things that YouTubers tell you to do.
Exactly. All the above.
Yeah. So if you have any other ideas of things that could affect your case value, please just go ahead and put that in the comment section below. It may be helpful to us, may be helpful to other people watching this video. Otherwise, we will see you next week for video number 7 on how to maximize the value of your case.